Welcome to Bardling's Banter. This is Matthew, your humble host. Today we will be discussing healing in and out of combat in D&D, so without further ado, let's get started. First off, any class in D&D has the potential to be a healer. Some classes are better than others. Example being obviously the cleric, the classic healer. That being said, if you're a cleric and all you are doing is healing your allies, you're doing it wrong. What do I mean by that? Well, as a cleric, you are a support role. There are many things you can do in combat that encompass being a support character. Healing is one of them. Buffing and debuffing is another one. Combat control, controlling the battle map, saying, hey, you're not in this fight. Hey, you're in this fight. Controlling which enemies have access to your allies at any given moment. That's another one. And of course, there is always roleplay and exploration, though that really takes part more in outside of combat situations, and obviously any character can do that. The problem I find with a lot of people who start playing D&D and are told they're going to play a healer or decide to play a healer, they try to play a healer as if they are in a video game. D&D is not a video game because it works off of a turn-based system. So, there is something called the action economy, and you want to be in control of that as a player. Basically meaning, if you have more turns than your enemy, you will, statistically speaking, probably win. So, if one of your players is using his or her turn to do something other than damaging your enemy, they need to make sure that it still brings the same amount of force or value to that combat encounter. Sadly, a lot of the times, healing just isn't there. Don't get me wrong though, if you have someone who is at 1 hit point, by all means, go ahead and heal them. Most of the times though, healing your ally when he has 30 hit points left is less than efficient. So, in this discussion, I want to go over what kind of mindset you need to have when you are told you are playing a healer, what other things you should be doing, in this case during combat, when you're a healer. So the first thing I would say is when you're playing a healer in D&D, look at it, again, less like you're playing a video game, and more like you are a combat medic. So, the role of a combat medic is first and foremost to ensure, in this case, your party's survival. So how do you ensure your party's survival in a combat situation? Most of the time, the best way is to end that combat as fast as possible. How do you end combat as fast as possible? By being a part of it. So, really, as a healer, you're actually taking on more of a role in your party, because not only are you responsible for the survival of your party as a medic, you are still expected to contribute to the combat. That way, your team doesn't fall behind in that action economy. So, how do we do that? Preparation, preparation, preparation. There are spells and spell-like abilities that, particularly clerics, I'm going to say clerics a lot, but there are other classes and other subclasses that can be just as effective healers if you know how to use them. Anyway, there are spells and spell-like abilities that you as your party's healer can use to give party members what are called temporary hit points. Temporary hit points are basically extra hit points on top of their normal hit point count. So, for example, you give 10 temporary hit points to the fighter who has normally 38 hit points. He or she now, has effectively 48 hit points. Once those temporary hit points are lost, they're lost for good. But essentially, you have already healed them before they needed the healing, and while you are in combat, you can do other things. As I said, preparation, preparation, preparation. While in combat, the cleric or the support role needs to find new, interesting, different ways to support the overall team. This can come in forms of healing in the traditional sense. This can come in forms of buffs or debuffs, such as using the Bless spell, Fairy Fire, things like that. Or in the case of debuffs, spells like Hex, or Mind Sliver. Mind Sliver is one of my favorites because you are fulfilling two rules. You are damaging your opponent. In addition, they are taking 1d4 off of their next saving throw. So you're helping your party as well as dealing damage. Spells like that are perfect for clerics, perfect for support classes. Fairy Fire, perfect for support classes because anyone who attacks that opponent after you cast that spell attacks with advantage. Now, a lot of these spells do require concentration, which means you can only have one of these spells up at a time. So you have to be able to pick which one of these types of spells is most effective in the situation. So that level of judgment comes with experience as you play the game, as you learn more about the type of character you're playing and how they interact with others in your team. Additionally, you're going to find as time goes on, you are going to become intimately knowledgeable about a couple of specific spells. This is with any spellcasting class. Listen, there's a reason the wizard always casts Fireball, because they know exactly what it does and how it works. You, as a cleric, as a healing druid, as a bard who heals, you're going to learn a couple of spells and abilities where you know exactly how to use them to be most effective. So the big takeaway I want from this discussion for particularly new players who are looking at being the team's healer is to not look at it in the traditional video game sense. Look at it more as being a combat medic. So you need to prioritize ending that combat as fast as possible. A lot of times that's going to be all about your damage output. You're just as much a part of the team as any other player. Sometimes though, and I do want to hit on this, you could take a pacifist route. You can input and insert role-play moments into combat. People forget all the time, combat is still role-play. Sure, it's a little more exciting, but it's just as much roleplay as the talkie-talkie bits while you're in town. You could play a peace domain cleric who tries to broker peace and a truce during the fight. That is perfectly valid. You can play a war domain cleric who intimidates their enemies into fleeing. That is just as valid as I hit it with an axe. So we've also kind of touched on the fact that clerics aren't the only classes that can be the healer of the team. Druids can be very effective healers, particularly Circle of Shepherds, druids, and there are others. Bards can be effective healers. Obviously, paladins have some healing ability, but also Way of the Mercy Monk. That is a newer type of healing character that is actually very effective for that combat medic role because of how it works. Look through your books, look at content online for new interesting ways on how to use these abilities as they come out. But if you want to play a healer, you don't necessarily have to play that classic cleric. Now that we've gone over what a cleric or a healer does during combat, let's actually talk about what a healer should be doing right after combat. So during combat, as I said, you're not really using a bunch of healing spells. So if you're a cleric or a healer, what is the point of these spells? Most of these spells, your healing word, your lay on hands, those sort of things, need to be used right after battle. Again, if you have a party member who's on death's door during combat, by all means heal them. That is not what I'm saying. But for the most part, the party should go through a combat, take some time, loot the bodies, and the cleric during this time should be healing, should be triaging, that sort of thing. So that is where you use your spells that directly heal. That is where you use your abilities that, hey, we are going to go ahead and you get a short rest in. Go ahead and add another d6 to your hit die roll for your short rest. Things like that. That is what a healer is really doing. In one of my favorite books, the Barbarian is quoted as saying, "The fight isn't over until you're fighting the next one." And this really talks about, what the healer is actually doing. The healer is responsible for keeping the party on their feet. Lastly, in this video, I want to go over that in-between time between the combat rounds. So that's obviously one of the things is going to be roleplay within town. I'm not going to tell you how to roleplay your character. You are a cleric. Your relationship with your deity is as important or as unimportant as you want it to be. Also note, your deity does not have to be a deity. It can be a concept. You have sworn an oath to the concept of law and order, to the concept of justice, to the concept of truth. Talk to your DM and talk about what kind of character you want to build. In a dungeon crawl sense, when I mean in between the combats, we're talking about exploration. It is worth taking maybe a spell or two that will facilitate that. This can look like detect evil and good, detect magic, identify. I realize at low levels you might not have the resources to take these spells. Discuss it amongst your team. Hopefully you're not the only support class. Hopefully you have that situation where, hey, you've got a fighter, you've got a rogue, you've got a wizard, and you've got a cleric, or some sort of, maybe the wizard takes identify and you take detect magic, and between the two of you, you can really help explore your environment. So to summarize, because I know that was a lot of information, the things I want really you guys to take away from this video is that when playing a healer in D&D, you gotta get away from that video game mindset of spamming healing spells. That's not very effective. When in combat, you have to think of it as a combat medic. You are prioritizing ending the combat quickly, keeping your team in top condition. So that's preparation, and being proactive instead of reactive. Outside of combat, make sure you're taking spells and abilities that help push the storyline on. This goes for any role, guys, not just healers, but you gotta make sure that, the only thing you can do isn't just heal people and deal a bit of damage. Bring something else to the table. Maybe you're really good at identifying magic items. That's really cool. Integrate your backstory into your character and their abilities and how they use them. Thank you so much for joining me, guys. Just a reminder, ask whatever questions you have. Drop that in the comment section. That's how I know you're listening, and also that's how I know what kind of things you want to learn more about in D&D. So, once again, this has been Matthew, wishing you all 1d10 worth of inspiration.